Welcome to another edition of the MYB Cast, a podcast devoted to educating our followers to alternatives for self-care and wellness through the somatic world of our mind-body connection. Today we're featuring another episode of our series Portraits and Pioneers. Portraits of Pioneers is an in-depth look at those that have been actively involved in the exploration, the development, and practice of somatic touch therapy. I'm Richard Mack, and I'm here with my co-host, Anna Marie Bowers. And today, Anna Marie and I are honored and excited to have Kate Rose join us. Kate?
Good morning.
Welcome, Kate. Good morning. We'd
Mm.
like to start with just hearing a little bit about how you got involved in somatics, somatic touch therapy, your beginning stories, how this even came into your life.
Okay, I was a ballerina, a dancer from the time I was 5 years old. I was dancing, and they started me dancing because I was born severely pigeon-toed. And in those days, uh, the solution for that was to take two shoes with a metal bar and put them on a 3-month-old baby, which really had a pretty strong effect on my body. And then they started me in ballet when I was 5 years old so they could do the turn in to a turn out, which of course, when I was pretty young, I was a dancer. So of course I was always interested in movement, and I had a very unusual, I suppose, relationship with my body because I could pretty much tell it what to do and it would do it. If I knew, like, okay, which muscle do I need to use, I could do that. I didn't know that that was odd, but when I was I never had body work. When I was 26, I sustained a spinal injury from dancing, which was a mixture of over exercising, starvation, and what you do when you're a ballerina. And about 4 years after I injured myself, I had to stop dancing. So my life was over as I knew it. I went to live up in Ithaca, New York. And a very dear friend of mine said, "You have to go get a Traeger session." And I'm like, "I don't know what that is." And I was terrified. I didn't want anyone touching me. I was in a lot of pain, but I got there. And this was with a wonderful woman named Rita, who was someone who just went to be with Milton all the time. Like every month or every 6 weeks, she went to a training with him. So my experience of the work was it was different every time I went. So that was how I got introduced to the Traeger approach, which I received sessions for about a year and a half. And like I said, every session was kind of a direct transmission because she'd come home from being with Dr. Traeger, with Milton, and it was quite remarkable. And that's what I thought it was, right? But then one day I sat up on the table after a session, and it was like I woke up out of a coma. And I looked around and I said, "Where have I been?" And realized that from the time of the injury until that moment, I was not here. I looked like I was here and everyone thought I was here, but I wasn't here. And then I thought, I have to find out about this work. And although she was an incredible practitioner, as with many people, she couldn't really talk about the work, explain what it was. So I went to my first, in those days, it was a beginning training with Gail in New York City. And it was like a million assistants and 25 people. And I had never been in a situation like that before. And there were just many very, very profound moments of healing. Um, and the main thing was that they showed the video of the Parkinson's video, Milton's Parkinson's video, which, as you know, was made when in 87. And as soon as I saw him, I knew that he knew. I knew that he knew what feeling was because I'm a person that lives in the feeling realm as an empath. That was my normal world. But I knew that he knew, and I knew that he was my teacher, and I needed to go work with him. And of course, the only way you could do that at that time was to become a practitioner. So I did that very quickly within the year. And everyone kept saying to me, "You're putting him on a pedestal. You're going to be disappointed." And I thought, no, I don't think so. And I did the first training with him in Florida after I became a practitioner. He walked in the room and I thought, I was right. And in that training, he healed my back. He would, he would always go around and ask everyone in the beginning of the training, what part, and you'd tell, and then he'd work on you at some point. Um, am I where you want me to be with this? Or
Yes, yes, this is great.
So
okay,
let me
so
just do a little quick recap. So this is all 19 mid 80s, I'm understanding.
I became a practitioner. I started the training in '87.
Okay.
So end of '87, beginning of '88 was when I went to see Milton, I think, the first time. And then in '91, I became a tutor. As a dancer, and of course, Milton was a dancer, it was all choreography, you know, and so I thought it's very, very easy to learn. And it was mixed with this extraordinary being who was still teaching at that time.
Mm.
So I think in '90, maybe, I went to the first training that I went to with Milton. And the first one was in Florida. The second one the rest of them were in Laguna in California.
But you actually started with Gail Stewart in New York, you said.
Yeah, Gail was my level one teacher, and I had never met anyone like her. She was just total magic and amazing and brilliant, and such a good teacher. One of the main things I remember from that training was she made us lay down on the floor and laugh. She said, "We're gonna laugh," and I'm like, "How do you laugh? If how do you just laugh? Come on!" And I thought this isn't going to work for me. I can't do that. And then people started laughing, and it was utterly contagious until you had probably, I think there were 25 students and there must have been 10, at least 10 assistants. I mean, that was the training. Roger was becoming a tutor, and everybody was there, and you laughed until you were holding your sides, and it was incredibly healing. And she was just free. She was this free being. Of course, her with compassion through the roof, and gentleness and skill and transmission. But they showed the Parkinson's video, and as soon as I saw him, then I was like, okay, I got to do this, and that was my progression, to work with him. I knew I had to work with him,
Mm. Mm.
and when I did, he changed my life. I mean, he put me on the table. And Milton was, as you know, Henry, he had these incredibly long arms and these huge, huge hands. So he could have you anywhere on the table. Like if he was at the head of the table, he could easily have his hands on anybody's hips. He was at my side and he started tossing me, to like, because I had kept saying my back was completely sway backed after the injury because I had no way to hold it. I had no way to use my stomach muscles. So I had gone into this huge curve, and I kept saying, if someone could just unhook me. And of course, that's what he did. So he's tossing me, and Milton was still working very big in those days. So he's kind of throwing me across the table. And I'm laying there thinking, oh my God, he's going to throw me into the wall. I'm going to die, blah, blah, blah. And then the other part of whatever was talking to me said, just shut up because you've been waiting your whole life for this. And so I did. And I got it from the table. My back was completely straight and it never went back. And that was the beginning. The other piece was it was a time when several friends and family had died in succession, so I had a lot of grief happening. And after a while, with enough grief, at least for me, you just stuff it, right? It's like, well, okay, that's all good. So my chest was like cement, and we were doing the chest compressions, and the poor practitioner who was working on me could get nothing. And so Betty Fuller was there, and if you've never met Betty Fuller, I know you know her. You knew her. Um, she was huge. She was a very, very tall woman, but she was enormous. She was probably well over 300 pounds. And I saw her, I had worked with her before, in class, but I saw her coming towards me and I thought, oh, she's going to squish me. And she came around the back of the table and she slid one hand under me and put the other hand on my chest. And you know those really big fluffy clouds that you see in the sky and you think, oh, wouldn't it be nice to just lay on it? That's what Betty was like. She was like the biggest, softest cloud you could ever imagine being embraced by. And she just very softly did for maybe less than a minute. And then she stopped and she said, well, that's all she's going to give me. And she went around the side of the table and just stood there. And I looked up at her and I said, Betty, all my friends are dying. And I burst into tears, which was not something I did in public. And, you know, Milton came running over because he loved that when that happened. And he patted me on the shoulder and Betty said, all her friends are dying, Milton. And he goes, oh, okay. And he just patted me on the shoulder and he left. And it was absolutely the most wonderful, accepting, supportive experience I ever had. There was nobody tried to comfort me. Nobody tried to fix it. It was just accepted. It was a release. And so there was, you know, there were always lots and lots of openings like that in the trainings with him. In fact, he would count them off with Emily. That's 6, Emily. I just want to get my shawl.
Mm.
So that was the beginning of my work with him and, you know, becoming a practitioner and starting to work with people and trying to understand what Milton meant about nothing, which took me another 15 years.
I'd like to just interrupt you for a second. Your thought. You mentioned Gail. We had Gail on for an interview earlier,
Yeah.
and I will say, having had both Gail and you as an instructor, as a Traeger instructor in my training, you and Gail had a very, very similar approach. Your ability to tap into, hook up into that subliminal space was uncanny and a very special aspect of the work that you both kind of shared. And I always remembered you from that aspect. The other question that I have for you is that I also recall working with you that being an empath that you are, that you're extremely sensitive to touch. I mean, the few times that I've worked on you, you know, what could be lighter, what could be softer, you're way too much. You're coming way too heavy into me. And I was just like, well, I'm just not doing anything. I'm just being here. He goes, you're getting it. You're getting closer. So I can only imagine what that must have felt like when Milton first put his hands on you and he was basically flowing you all over the place.
Well, that was, I know Anna Marie can say the same thing. That was the thing. Milton, you talk about hookup as something, you know, one goes into, so to speak. In my experience teaching the work, I was always, you know, initially going, how can we create this consciousness, this quote unquote hookup? And then I started to realize that it's like he said, it's around you all the time. There's no separation. We come out of it. It's not that you have to hook up to it, you just have to go back in. And when I started to try and teach people how to find that place, I would ask them, how do you go into hookup, quote unquote? Nowadays, that word is a little funny. So, you know, it may need editing. I don't know. And they would say, well, first I do da da da. And I say to them, that is it. The moment in between when you think I want to do this and then you're there, that's it. And everyone was just astonished, like, oh, I can go there. But Milton lived there. He just lived with this space in this reality of oneness is what I call it, you know, interconnectedness, this awareness. And so when he touched you, he wasn't touching your body, he was touching your mind and your whole consciousness when he talks about the unconscious mind, et cetera, et cetera. And you knew that. You knew you were utterly being met and you were totally safe. It was extraordinary. Yeah, it was, you know, he's one of those beings that came to the planet with an incredible gift. And I had the amazing grace to be with him and learn from him and be touched by him.
his presence at the table with you was an incredible experience, just
Yeah.
his sheer presence at the table, you're right.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about or go ahead with what you were gonna
No,
say,
no,
but
no, I'll keep going.
I was curious about the nothing, the nothingness. You had kind of mentioned a little bit about an aha moment you had about, "Oh, this is what that means." How could it
Oh, there
be?
were there were a few of those. Um, the first one I would say, or the first step onto that pathway, was the first time I was with Milton at a conference in, I think it was Indianapolis. It was huge, and we were
Mhm.
up on that. It was the one that Al Wong came to, I think.
Yes, that was Indianapolis.
Yeah, that was really neat. And so we were up on this top floor, huge, huge, almost like a ballroom or something, doing mentastics. And I was playing with the question, what could be lighter? And I was playing with it, playing. And then I thought, well, it could always be lighter because you just cut it in half, right? So I went over to Milton and I said, Milton, it can always be lighter, right? And he goes, darling, I've been doing this for 50 years and I'm just at the beginning. And I thought, oh dear, I'm in trouble. I'll never get there. But then, you begin to play with it. Then there was a moment in my practice one day where I was with a client who fortunately was a long-term client and someone that we did trades. We did trades. She's a craniosacral therapist, so we knew each other well. And I started the session and was sitting on the table getting ready to play with her head. And I went, excuse me, suddenly it was like I'd had an instant lobotomy. I mean, everything was gone. I had no sense of what I was doing or where I was or what I was supposed to do. And I thought, should I just stop? It was just emptiness, just total emptiness. And I thought, well, so I just thought I'll do my best. So I just did the whole session, the whole time with this continual question. Do you remember how Milton at the table would go,
Yes.
well, he'd always be going, well, and I think, well, what? And I realized about halfway through the session, I realized I was going, well, and at the end of the session, I thought, well, if it's really terrible and there was no effect, I won't let her pay me. I'll just say, I'm really sorry. My brain went dead. And, she got up from the table and she said, that was the most incredible session I've ever had. And she went on and on and on. And I said, well, that's great. I said, because I didn't know what I was doing. And she said, well, whatever you weren't doing, keep not doing it. And so it took me quite a while because it stayed. It wasn't something that left. And then one day I realized I was still fighting with it, that I was still trying to figure out what it was. And I thought, you know what? I just need to drop into it. And I dropped. And in that moment, I started to understand something new, which was that I didn't actually need to do anything. All I needed to do was listen and ask, that the system itself was always talking. And if I could get my listening pure enough, it just guided me right through every single session. And it did, and it just kept growing. And then that morphed over the years into recently, um, I've been focusing on the quantum field, and I had a friend that recently wrote a book about it and um, was talking about the process of kind of sinking into that place, which again, I call it the quantum lake. It's like a place of nothing, but where everything is, all living potential is there. And I would start by just kind of being with one atom, right? The way he described it. And then the subatomic, which is still a something. And then there's a place below that that's just the quantum nothingness. And when I found myself in it, it's like a very deep state of meditation. I realized that not only was there nothing at all, but there was also the infinite possibility of everything. And that I was dropping into that lake at the time, dealing with a very painful situation in my own body that I was working on healing, which is now healed. But that I could come out of the lake with the healed part of me. In other words, why not? you know. So I began to play with that, and that was another level of nothingness. I think I made a note about nothingness that I can look and see if I can find, but I think it's the not doing, which of course is very hard on the ego. But I want it.
Yes,
I think,
yes.
if Milton ever gave me a mantra, it was, we were at a training in Laguna before we all got started. He said, before you begin, ask yourself, what would this feel like if I wasn't trying?
Huh.
Mhm.
I thought, I'm going to sit here for the rest of my life. How can I begin? Because no matter how many levels I dropped down, there was still something in me that was trying. So it just became a lifelong practice to ask. I ask it in every single session with every single touch. What would this feel like if I wasn't trying?
Mm.
That's really powerful, Kate. That's really powerful.
It was. I mean, it stayed with me. Did Gail tell you the story about her own experience of deepening her hookup and what happened with Milton? I don't think she'd mind. It's a great story. She had been, working on herself and going deeper and deeper and deeper. And she finally said, "Well, I found this place and I thought this is it." And so every time before she did a session, she'd go down into this place to start her session. So she went to a training with Milton. I think it's an instructor's training, and everybody's in a big circle and everyone's got a client on the table, and she's just getting ready to start, and she's dropping into her space and dropping into it, and she's just going to start, and from across the room Milton says, "That's not it, Gail, it's deeper than that."
This is a good place, if I may, to talk deeper about hookup because I know there's a lot of youngsters, people that are below 40 years old watching these podcasts that we're doing. And hookup is not a sexual relationship with just going out and having sex with somebody. It's
Right.
far deeper than that. As a matter of fact, I mean, it's a place that you can go that your hearts basically combined. It's that oneness, that place of oneness that we're all capable of if we allow ourselves to be in our heart and connect. And from my expression, and as I said earlier on in this episode, you and Gail were my teachers that really brought me into that place of understanding that mind, body, spirit connection coming into this place that we call hookup. And it's a wonderful, wonderful place. And God knows the world could all benefit from us being in hookup right now.
And
I just to say in reference to the word, once I didn't know about it. And then someone mentioned it to me, and I thought, well, I just stopped using it because as the term that I described the experience in, because it's a very quote unquote Traeger term. It doesn't mean a lot from my perspective, it doesn't make sense to people. And I felt that if I was trying to express something about it, I didn't want to have to bring in something that was going to confuse people because of the slang that it has become. And I don't think of it the way Milton thought of it. Like I said, I experience it differently in the sense of it's something that's there every single living second. There's not a time when you aren't connected. It's a matter of whether you remember that you're connected or not, and all the many things that easily pull us out of of that connection. I mean, these. So that's where I am with that.
Mhm.
Just to know.
that's
Good.
great. That's great. How did you find this deepening sense of connection helping you personally with your things that you were going through in your life, different pain, ailments, things like that? How did that kind of translate for you in terms of your own experience with hookup and healing?
I would say that it was really understanding and discovering what mantastics really are. And this happened for me when I moved to Italy. And Luca and I were living and teaching together, and he literally lived mantastics on a day-to-day basis. So we were constantly 24 hours a day. It was like, what does that feel like? And so I began to understand that Did we just lose Anne Marie?
No, we're good.
No,
Keep
I just cut my video. I'm sorry
Okay,
for the
that's
distraction. Please go
okay,
ahead.
no problem. Zoom consciousness. Um, so it was understanding that this was not about movement and exercises and doing anything. It was about an inner self exploration that you could go whether you wanted whatever system you wanted to investigate, to be with, and that once you went into the system you would be led to another part of the system. So it became a practice to be inside myself in movement and feel the movement and question the movement all the time. And when it wasn't moving, feel it,
Hmm.
not try to make it move, but go, oh, well, that's not really moving. It's the same where I find it the same working with a client that, the attitude of I need to make this move. To me, it was always, and I would teach it this way, it's not, it's discovering where the movement lives. It's always living because it's, of course, as you have cellular memory, so it's established. It's data in the system. It's simply a matter of me being able to create a space to allow the data to express itself. In terms of my own healing, it's integral to it because it taught me how to go in and open and feel deeper and deeper and deeper, because discoveries that you make are extraordinary in terms of discovering the whole nervous system and all the layers of the many systems, how they're integrated together, how they're out of balance, what balance feels like. And those questions, not necessarily how do I get my shoulder to relax, but what would what would a soft shoulder, what could my shoulder be like? I wonder, that was what came in. I wonder what it would be like if, was always my question, because then I discovered that the left brain doesn't really like that question because
Yes.
because it isn't logical. But and I don't even think of it as the right and left brain anymore. I think of it as infinite imagination and rational thinking. um, when the infinite imagination is accessed, it quite literally is infinite. So asking that question creates a cascade of, I'm sure, millions of neurons going, we need to answer that question. So it's carried me and carries me every single day of my life. I mean, in these past 2 years, I was dealing with a very serious spinal something that made me disabled for almost 2 years. So I couldn't walk and I was in terrible, terrible pain. And it wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. And nobody could figure out, of course, what it was. So I had to go on a journey that was completely different because none of the things worked that I knew, but I still just kept dropping down, dropping down, dropping down, and trying to find where there was movement, where there wasn't movement. After sometime about a year and no, maybe, yeah, about a year and a half ago, my dog Sophie, who just passed away. We were walking out in the countryside early, early in the morning. It was before dawn, and walking was new. I hadn't been doing it for quite a while. And all of a sudden, I had this feeling that I wasn't walking. The earth was bouncing my feet. It was just, if I went to take a step, there was nothing I needed to do. It was the earth that was coming up into my feet. And I suddenly had this incredible recall of when I was a dancer, because that's what you're doing all the time. You're in this relationship with gravity where, it's like you're kissing it and it kisses you back and bounces you away. So it was really, when people talk about this as a technique or whatever, Milton always talked about it as an approach, and I always experience it as an approach to living. It's an approach to living moment by moment, and it's one that I think has kept me alive. And that was
Mm.
the last conversation we had, the last training I was with him in Laguna, and I knew it was going to be the last training I was with him. And I waited till everyone left and just went over and sat with him. And I just told him, how much I appreciated him. And I said, you gave me my life back, because he did, you know.
Hmm.
And that
Mm.
is a living gift that has just never, never changed. Did that
Wow.
like answer your question?
Yes. Yes, absolutely, Kate. Go ahead, Richard.
Not only did it answer the question, it's a great place for us to take a pause. And I'm going to invite our audience to join us for episode 2, where we're going to ask Kate a little bit about her explorations in the world of Traeger. Kate's been a teacher around the globe and has had clients from around the globe. And we're going to cover that on our next episode. So please join us, and we'll see you at the next episode. Be well.
Thank you.